So as some of you know, currently I reside in South Korea, and South Korea is going through a major crisis when it comes to fertility. As a matter of fact, there's a joke in South Korea where this country always tries to be number one in everything, and they just became number one for the lowest fertility on the planet. According to World Bank, the fertility here is so low that you're actually more likely to win the lottery than to see a child. Okay, it's maybe not that bad, but it is pretty bad. And so today, when I was walking around, just for funsies, I wanted to see how many strollers am I going to be able to find just by walking in my neighborhood right before I came back and started to record this video. But more importantly, my question was, what's inside the stroller? Because for some reason, in the last few years, here and in a lot of other Asian countries, people now started to buy more strollers for their pets than for their non-existent children. And well, in case you're curious, I counted 5 strollers in approximately 20 minutes, and inside of the strollers were 4 dogs and 1 cat. Yeah, not even kidding. And none of those strollers contained children, which is basically going to be the topic of this somewhat unusual video. In this era of unprecedented demographic shifts, there is maybe one unsettling question that we need to tackle. Are our beloved pets, or I guess our cats and our dogs, and potentially other furry, feathered, scaled companions, inadvertently replacing our cute babies? And though obviously it might sound like something out of the Black Mirror episode, or something even kind of cringy and cheesy, science would like to disagree. We have at least a few studies from 2025 that use actual data and actual analysis telling us a compelling story. Data that, though correlational, is still kind of intriguing and is worth tackling. Because right now we know that around the globe, the birth rates are plummeting, yet surprisingly the pet ownership is soaring. And the question is this some kind of a coincidence? Or is this a profound societal transformation? And so in this video we're going to explore this a little bit more and delve into the scientific evidence behind this somewhat intriguing phenomenon. And we're also going to explore how our evolving relationship with animals intersects with the future of human reproduction, particularly in countries like India, South Korea, and Japan. The countries that currently seem to lead in this somewhat bizarre phenomenon. Okay, so let's discuss this, but maybe make sure that your cat and your dog don't hear this, because they might get suspicious. Anyway, for centuries, pets have always been our companions. But it's really in recent decades that their role for some reason has evolved. Because we no longer see them just as animals, in a lot of societies they're now seen as part of the family. And in the West we often refer to them as our furry babies. A term that was officially added to the Oxford Dictionary in 2015, defined as a person's pet animal treated with the love and attention given to a child. And this is obviously not just anecdotal, because in the last decade or so, several different studies show that there is a significant increase in pet ownership, with a lot of owners treating their pets as human offspring. For example, research from Eötvös Loránd University highlights that while dogs don't actually replace children, they seem to be able to fulfill a powerful nurturing drive and also have less demands compared to human offspring, with this phenomenon becoming very pronounced in wealthy and developed countries where dog ownership surged alongside declining birth rates. For example, here's a graph by American Veterinary Medical Association showing us a definitive uptrend when it comes to the ownership of dogs and cats. And so for anyone who has a dog or even a cat, this probably kind of makes sense. They provide us with emotional connection, sense of purpose, social support, and can also provide very similar joy to what a typical parent may experience. And because so many dogs are also relatively clever, and also because some of them are kind of dependent on humans, their cognitive abilities and their inherent dependency makes them excellent candidates for this childlike role, to some extent mirroring the helplessness and innocence of young children. But it's also crucial to note that most dog owners do acknowledge that their pets have species-specific needs, and only a minority of people treat them exactly like humans. But despite of this trend of pet parenting is undeniable, and of course begs the question, what implications does this have on the society? Well, while pet ownership flourishes, there is also obviously this silent crisis unfolding across the globe, a dramatic decline in fertility rates in most developed countries. The global average has fallen from 5.3 births per woman back in 1963 to just 2.3 in 2023. And this is not just a Western phenomenon. This is a worldwide trend with profound implications for our future. And so here we do have actual results from 3 countries South Korea, India, and Japan. And India is a particularly intriguing example. Still a developing nation, and actually the most populous nation, is experiencing a rapid fertility decline never before seen anywhere. And even this study from 2012 already noted how bad it was. The majority of provinces in India reached a fertility rate below 2, even though it was much higher just 20 years prior. And so it actually went from 5.7 on average in 1950 down to exactly 2 in early 2025, and many regions are way below that. And this decline surprisingly seems to have occurred despite relatively modest socioeconomic progress, largely due to aggressive family welfare programs, with the consequence being that India seems to be getting older before getting rich. And that's a big problem because they're basically going to have a lot of old people, yet limited resources and limited pension to provide for everyone. This is definitely going to create a healthcare crisis in the next few decades. And so this demographic shift poses significant economic and social challenges that currently just does not have a very good resolution. But since this video is really about the increase in pet ownership and potential correlation, surprisingly, the dog ownership in India has gone up quite a lot. The number of households with pet dogs in India has reached almost 25 million in 2025. And this created a huge boom for a lot of pet care industries in comparison to what you'd expect in just the last 10 years. But then we have two developed countries we need to discuss as well. We have Japan and South Korea. And technically Japan is the pioneer of demographic aging. It was one of the first developed countries to suddenly reach this unusual crisis. Record low birth rates and a huge amount of elderly people. As a matter of fact, Japan now had 10 consecutive years of extremely low birth rate, with a graph resembling a flat line, close to about 1.2 births per woman. And though this has been blamed on high living costs, difficult job prospects, and the overall strict corporate culture that's usually incompatible with dual working parents, in reality there's no clear answer, only clear problems that this is already going to be causing very soon. We're talking about severe economic and national security concerns, with staggering 30% population decline by 2070. And at the same time, we get a graph like this from the Japan Pet Food Association showing us a steady increase in pet food market during the same period of time, implying that, well, clearly there are just more pets, thus requiring more pet food. And the last but definitely not least is the place where I am right now, South Korea. And this is the country that faces perhaps the most extreme example of this crisis. Here the fertility dropped from 6 in 1960 to just above 0.7 in 2024. This is the lowest fertility in the world and is completely unsustainable. And it's actually been like this for several years, becoming a national emergency. And that's despite the government's attempts to spend on pro-natal policies, or by putting up all sorts of posters about how wonderful it is to have children in Korea. And they're definitely not exaggerating. I think in the last 2 months or so, I've only seen like a couple of infants and barely any toddlers around. And though it's easy to speculate about reasons such as family and friendly work culture, the reality is much more complicated, and none of this is unlikely to improve anytime soon. As a matter of fact, most young people in Korea are extremely pessimistic about their own future, and so for them thinking about kids is definitely beyond their comfort zone. And it just so happens that of all Asian countries, South Korea is also number 1 for pet ownership as well. As of 2024, approximately 15.5 million people here own pets, accounting for nearly 30% of population, with dogs representing 3/4 of all pets. And here the spending on pets, including dogs, has also risen notably. It's actually gone up by about 7% every single year. And so in just the last 10 years, South Korea transformed its culture into a pet culture, now favoring the term companion animal over pet, essentially emphasizing an emotional bond. And so surprisingly, the increase in pet ownership seems to kind of correlate with a dramatic drop in fertility. And so the question is, how do these two trends intertwine? Well, the idea here is that the pets are not literally replacing children, and instead it's a more nuanced interplay of societal, economic, and psychological factors. For example, individuals that potentially have resources to raise children may choose not to because pets fulfill their nurturing desire without any significant financial or lifestyle demands from a typical human baby. With a lot of emotional rewards of pet ownership, such as companionship, unconditional love, and a sense of purpose, mirroring aspects of parenthood, offering an alternative in a culture where having children is maybe a little bit challenging. And this is directly supported by the concept described in this study, known as cultural evolution. The concept where our innate nurturing drives, traditionally directed toward human offspring, are now being redirected toward pets, especially in societies undergoing rapid demographic and social changes. Societies like South Korea, Japan, and India. And so here this is described as a complex dance between biological predispositions and evolving cultural landscape. Something that has happened before, where due to changes in the environment, humans have culturally redirected biological needs, replacing them with something else. And dogs in this case make a perfect alternative, replacing a childlike role in a lot of societies. Intriguingly, something very similar was discovered in this study, and here this was conducted in China, that's also going through some very similar socioeconomic changes. But despite offering us comfort and companionship, none of this obviously addresses the bigger problem in most of these cultures. The declining birth rates and aging workforce is eventually going to become a huge societal strain, creating a major issue. But I guess what's kind of intriguing in this case is that we seem to have reports from 4 separate cultures, with all 4 cultures facing very similar issues, but also a lot of people choosing to replace their emotional needs by having a pet instead of a child. And so maybe one of the solutions to this infertility crisis is to try to understand why some people choose to have an attachment to a pet instead of a child, especially in cases where they do have the money and the resources to have a family and to have a child. As a matter of fact, this is not anecdotal. I know quite a few people in South Korea that are in that exact situation. They have tiny dogs that they basically treat like children, yet they don't want to have kids, even though they do have the resources. And so this relationship between having pets and human fertility is a mirror reflecting our changing world. It obviously highlights our innate need for nurture and connection, but also reminds us of extreme pressures from the societies we live in. And so trying to understand the complexity of emotions and complexity of needs involved here is maybe the first step in figuring out why the world is facing such a huge fertility crisis. But it's also important to understand that this is not just a conversation between having babies or having pets. This is about providing a future where anyone is comfortable to have kids without having the pressure from outside. And so the conversation here should not be about having pets or having children, but really about figuring out why pets are able to replace so many emotional needs so easily, and how we can maybe help young families to feel the same without the societal burden on top of this. And this is definitely especially true for a lot of Asian countries, where there's usually a lot of pressure to have kids. But anyway, in the end, so what do these studies tell us? Well, right now there's no conclusive evidence, but there's definitely a lot of correlation and a lot of potential explanations that pets, and especially dogs, seem to indeed be able to replace some of the needs we have for love and companionship offered by children, but without the extra effort. And because in all countries I mentioned, the actual graph between pet ownership and a drop in fertility is almost directly reversed, at the moment we can only conclude that pets are indeed slowly replacing children. And especially with all the strollers I see outside, that nowadays extremely rarely have kids in them, but very often have dogs, sometimes a cat. And so, quite an unusual topic for me to cover, but I still wanted to cover this, because honestly it's kind of been bugging me for a long time, especially since I started noticing this a few years back. But it's also something that we obviously have no solutions for yet, and something that a lot of governments are going to be exploring for years and years to come, although I honestly don't see any solution yet. And so anyway, tomorrow we'll discuss something entirely different. Until then, thank you for watching, subscribe, come back tomorrow to learn something else, support this channel on Patreon where you can find additional videos without any ads, and can DM me directly, or by joining the channel membership that grants you early access. Maybe support this channel by buying the Wonderful Person t-shirt in the description. Stay wonderful, I'll see you tomorrow, and as always, bye bye.